I'm trying so hard to figure out how to do this. Come on, new picture. There you go. Look, there's Venice. And so these pictures, interestingly, I recorded the pictures before the scanning existed. So this is a photograph of a print. And if you look closely, I don't know how closely you guys can look, but you can see the texture of the paper, which at the time was super important to me, the handmade aspect of it. And now, even if I'm doing big negatives and large format work, I scan the negative to show it. And that's a completely different beast than, really being able to see print quality in the reproduction of the picture, because always print quality was really it for me. At a certain juncture, I changed from photographing outside to photographing inside. And that change took place because I had a baby and I could no longer be tromping all over with my large equipment and a baby. And even when somebody was taking care of my baby, I needed to be available somewhere where people might be able to call me on a telephone. And so I switched my practice from landscape and what I used to refer to as professional trespasser to essentially studio work, and initially still lives. And so these are all albumin prints. Somewhere in there, actually, after I had the baby and before I had the second baby, in that period of time, I developed a process. People like to say I invented a photographic process, but that's not really it. I expanded on the albumin process. I sort of took it to where it would have naturally gone if it hadn't been replaced by gelatin silver. So I spent a couple of years coming up with a very matte albumin process. So the prints are dead matte. There is no gloss to it. And traditional albumin prints have a beautiful gloss, which I sought to get rid of, mostly because I don't like things that are shiny. And so that process was published as the Zimmerman method in Christopher James's alternative photographic process book. So either I invented a photographic process or not. But all of these images, I utilized that printing process. So they're gold-toned matte albumin prints, and they have, they're contact prints, they're big negatives, they have a fabulous detail for that technology. And yes, for a long time, I was shooting these still lives that were all, of course, deeper than just being a still life. They're metaphors for my internal nonsense. This picture is metaphorically a distillation of my memories of Italy. It's called Memoria Italia, and there it is, my memories inside labware from the darkroom. So anyway, I started out doing very traditional work in a very traditional way and continued doing it for really quite a long time. And, you know, showing in galleries and being collected by museums and such with this work. But I think what I was also doing was honing my skills, learning my craft. And I was pretty solid in that I was expressing myself. And then somebody wrote a review of my work that said the opposite, which really made me think. And I've had a bazillion really fabulous reviews. I don't remember any of them. I cannot quote you the positive things, but the one stinging ouch of a review, the reviewer said, what Miss Zimmerman lacks in personal expression, she makes up for in technical excellence. And that hurt because I thought I was all kinds of expressing myself. And apparently that reviewer, or people in general, I don't know, were just thinking, damn, that girl can print. And so I needed to venture into work that was more personal or expressive in some way, just to see if I could. Or maybe I just wasn't getting the point across. So I ventured into getting the point across. Yeah, that's a good one to land on. This picture should be called Don't Piss Me Off, but it's not. It is called Under Your Hat. And I was a little more than a little annoyed with my husband. And it's also a really good example of sort of where I went with my work, which is kind of magic realism, kind of fantastical before Photoshop. Sort of fantastical work is very common now because people can superimpose things and add things, and I don't even know all the terminology of what people do with Photoshop and now artificial intelligence and all of that. But previous to that, I took this picture, and after I took it, a lot of people said, how did you get that hat to look like it was on fire? I lit it on fire. So things started getting a little fantastical in my work in real time, in real life. No Photoshop. This picture is only important in that I just put this in as sort of a one-off because this body of work, it was a theme that was given to me by a museum. They wanted me to be in a show. They gave me the theme. I had no work that fit their theme. The theme was the dress. This picture is called The Prenup, which if you really look at it, it's fairly self-explanatory. But they wanted me to be in this show and didn't give me enough time to produce and print all of the work before the show. I think that, you know, I had 2 months to come up with the work for that show. And I didn't love the theme. It was a women's show and they gave us a women's theme. And I think because I found it slightly demeaning, I got very overachiever about what the images were. But the key thing about this is that I didn't have time to print the work myself. Albumin printing takes a long time to get it right. And so this represents the first work that I did, that I showed, that I didn't print myself. And you can see that this image is the same color as my albumin prints. I did that very specifically because I was horrified that I was going to be called out as a fraud because I hadn't printed my own work. And so I had somebody make the, archival pigment prints for me. And I put up the show, and I really was extremely worried that, I don't know, I wasn't the real deal anymore if I wasn't doing every single step myself. But of course, nobody noticed. Nobody knew what those things were that I was doing before and how much work went into that, or what these things were. Not a single person at the opening questioned also why suddenly I had the ability to make much bigger prints, because I never ventured into making digital negatives, enlarged negatives. So my work up to this point was, the largest print I ever did was 16 by 20, and that was a stretch. So this is just an example of how you can do something that you think that you're really going out on a limb, and then nobody notices. This series, I am skipping over a whole bunch of stuff, but this series is an ongoing series that is a collaboration between my daughter and I. And I think we're about to wrap it up because this was the first picture in the series, and she was 3 years old when we did this. And she will turn 21 in April. So we're thinking about stopping. But every year we take a picture that started out as me just trying to include her in my studio life and keep her occupied and excited about the studio, because I had to be there a lot. And it started with me, just using her as a model, and then very quickly became a collaborative effort where she came up with the ideas for the pictures. And this is also another really good example of this sort of fantastical.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
I'm sorry, I don't know why my computer is saying that.
It's okay, Zoe.
Why would my computer be making that? Never mind, I'm going on. So anyway, this picture, it's a pirate ship flying through. It's called Her Dream. The project is called Her Dream. And this is her dream of her eventual departure. And so we continued it. This is a very simple way of turning her into a fairy. But early on, like by this point, when she was, I don't know, 4 years old, maybe, the ideas for the pictures started to be her ideas. And so I can't say it's exactly my project. It's our project. This picture is called Haughty. kind of a little Princess and the Pea thing going on. But a lot of these over the years have that fantastical aspect. You know, how did I make the dollhouse look like it was on fire? I lit it on fire. Yes, there was a horse in the studio. And so you can see her growing up through this series. You can also see me changing process. The series started print-wise as 8x10 albumin prints. And now I've shown pieces of the series as, big, computer generated prints. So it's kind of funny that it shows the change in technology over the time. That one's called Fledgling, when she was leaving to go to high school. Oh, and there, end of that. Lots of years of doing just figures in the studio, the most photographed crates. I've continued to photograph these two crates because it just happens to be what I have in the studio, and they are now the most photographed crates. But this picture I took kind of right when the whole Me Too movement started, and this became kind of poster child for the women's movement. And I think because she's so vulnerable, bald, and so intently, boldly looking at the camera. And then, okay. So then this launches into what I'm doing now and sort of where I went and why. And the why has to do with the pandemic. I thought that the pandemic was going to last for 3 weeks. The virus was sort of a rumor in my little corner of northern New Mexico. I think that there wasn't a single case in New Mexico yet, or maybe 1 or 2 in Albuquerque. No masks, no lockdown. It was just sort of a thing out there. And then my daughter was supposed to come home from college, or we were going to meet for spring break. And all of a sudden she called me and said, she was in New York. She called me and said, okay, things are getting really strange here. I'm coming home, but we have to quarantine because I'm coming from a COVID hotspot. All of this was news to me. It really, nothing was going on in my little town in northern New Mexico. But my daughter came home the next day, and her college had sort of made this mandate of, okay, this is what we're doing about this virus, is we're going to extend spring break by a week, and then everybody can come back. And so my daughter came home, we had to quarantine when nobody was even wearing masks yet where I live. And so it was like we were the only people doing it. And I didn't really know that it was going to turn into this global pandemic where everybody was quarantining or lockdown or isolation of one sort or another. And so when I thought that it was going to be 3 weeks, and I had models lined up. I was working on 2 projects, very immersed in 2 projects that required bodies in the studio. And I had to cancel all of that to quarantine. So, canceled all the studio stuff, made all the people go away. And then it was a thing of like, well, what am I going to do for 3 weeks? three weeks or 3 years? Which I think it is like today, maybe yesterday, is like the 3-year mark from when I started this adventure. So what I decided was that I needed to hone my skills with digital and with color. I had never shown any color work. I did digital. I used digital cameras and did color work for my commercial work, which is just kind of camera for hire stuff that I do to supplement my starving artist income, and had been doing for a long time, but never felt like I really had a voice in color or in digital or computers. I came really late to all of that. And so what I thought was I had this 3-week period of time where I could learn. And in the official statement about this body of work, that's not what I say. I don't say, I didn't know anything and I thought perhaps I would learn. Because for some reason, people don't admit to not knowing things, or I guess that's it. I set out to find my voice in color. And so this is the first picture in the series. And you can see, really, it's mostly still black and white. So I had to kind of creep up on color. There is a little bit of blue up there. But yeah, I started out fairly monochromatic and just trying to learn how to do it. I mean, it's funny for me to look back at these now and go, yeah, that's not really color. But the great thing about this process of learning during the pandemic was that I shared the images as I went along. I shared them on Facebook, and as a means of keeping in touch with people. And by doing that, I created very quickly a following for the series. It became really important to a lot of people because, the technical stuff aside, what I was doing for myself, which was trying to learn something, the pictures were very definitely about the experience of isolation and fear and all those aspects of the pandemic. So it was kind of a visual diary of my pandemic. I kind of had working title of personal pandemic for it. No, that's not. So I just continued going with the series, and very early on, people commented that the work looked like old masters paintings, Flemish, Vermeer. Lots of people thought that they were painterly of a certain era, which made me think about what was it that I was doing, because they're not brushy or necessarily painterly. So I had to analyze, like, what is it that I'm doing that makes people think that they look like paintings? Because it's not even, you know, it's not really Caravaggio's light. I wish. I wish. But I figured out what it was, which is that we've gotten used to seeing things photographically. And that means seeing things with a depth of field that can be controlled. So we are used to seeing things where, for example, the background is blurred out. We look at that and we don't think that there's, you know, in painting and in photography and in, you know, in all of the visuals in movies, we don't think that's weird. Why is the background blurred out? But all of those masters' paintings were executed as the eye sees, which is that everything is in focus. Like when you look at something, you don't just see that thing and everything else around it is blurred out. And so I've decided that the reason these look like paintings, or people think they look like paintings, is because of the depth of field, because everything is sharp from the foreground to the background, and that is actually kind of pre-photographic seeing. And that is how those paintings were made. So the other thing, the pictures were the daily occurrences in a time when not much was occurring because everybody was isolated, and I was isolated, luckily, with my daughter, so I wasn't totally by myself. But on an acre of land in a rural community where at the best of times there's not much going on. So a lot of the pictures are just sort of what happened in the day. The chicken died. That chicken died. So also I insisted on only using objects for these still lives, objects that were available. So there was no, you know, buying flowers at the florist or ordering things online, or so really it was just coming up with what was available on my property. A lot of seasonal stuff. The seasons change with the pictures as to what was available. And pretty early on in the series, I sort of adopted the symbolism of the Vanitas paintings, where every aspect of those still lives, every object represented something. And it's like a very specific kind of dictionary of symbols. So, for example, lemons represented the bitterness of life. And so I sort of took on some of those definitions of the objects and then just created some of my very own. And make that thing go away. Sorry about my lack of technical know-how. Why was that going away before and now it won't? Oh, shit. Oh, now I've done it. Okay, I'm gonna try to go all the way through here and get to that picture. Sorry, learning. Well, I'm sorry that there. Okay, yay. So, you know, there's really subtle stuff going on in these pictures. some of it having to do with the seasons. Uh, those fronds are forsythia, but when the picture was taken, it's too early for the forsythia to be blooming. So I forced them, which just means I put them in water before they were ready to bloom and bloomed them in the house. But all of those little details become very significant in the series. And this is the largest body of work that I've ever done, that I am finished. And there are over 300 images that I'm keeping. That means I threw a ton of, there are a ton of them that I put out there and shared, and then I never want to see again because that happens. But of the keepers, there are around 300 of them. And in this process, I learned to have a voice in color, which is kind of thrilling that you can teach an old dog new tricks. And so I'm continuing. I'm done with this project. And I'm working on another project that was sort of commissioned by a museum of making still lives of some of the museum's ephemera, things that the museum has that they wouldn't put on display, but are excellent for making still lives of. So I just have continued. And what happened was I started sharing these images and created a whole community of people who really cared about them and felt connected somehow because of them during all that isolation. And then relatively early on, when I had done 40 pictures, done and shared 40 pictures, a collector contacted me, sent me a private message and said, I want to buy all of them. And I didn't really know what he meant, because at the time they were just digital files. I hadn't printed anything. And I had to write back and say, when you say that, what do you mean? Like, what is your idea of what it is that you would be purchasing? And he wanted prints of the first 40, which was fantastic because he paid me half up front, which gave me the ability to print them, which gave me the ability to sell them to other people. And so I supported myself and my family during the pandemic with the work that I did during the pandemic. And that has been very reassuring and wonderful. The only thing that I regret is that what he bought were the first 40. So those were like the beginning sort of really learning. And now, because I went so far with the series, I kind of wish I could trade them out with him so that he, because he made a lot of this possible. I wish that he could have the best, the best of the series, not the first 40. And so you can see, if you paid any attention to that Memoria Italia picture that I did, who knows when, long, long ago, that even though I've changed my medium and it's color and not black and white, and it's not a handmade process and all of that, there are themes that come back. So I have, I'm still photographing things in bottles. This was kind of the ultimate pandemic picture because the bird mask sort of harkens to the plague masks. certain interesting things happened for me in taking these pictures that made me pay more attention to sort of the minutia of the world around me on my little corner. I plant those irises. I know approximately when they bloom. I am madly in love with those wild sweet peas, but I never would have known that those things bloom at the same time if I hadn't been doing these pictures and paying such close attention, and that now this picture exists. So I know when my irises bloom, I can go in the field next door and there will be the wild sweet peas. So, it ended up being sort of like wonderfully informative in my life. So information from outside of my tiny realm in rural New Mexico, the outside world filtered in during the pandemic, and some of the pictures are about the outside influence. This picture was taken on the day that the George Floyd stuff came out. That's my sad George Floyd portrait. There were interesting occurrences that happened, little occurrences that I think were very specific to my particular era. There was some kind of early frost and songbirds were falling out of the sky. There were dead birds everywhere and everybody was finding them. And because people in my community knew that I was doing these pictures and that there's dead birds in the pictures rather often, people started bringing me gifts of dead birds. So many. I had a freezer full of subject matter. But just the sort of like sweet thing of people wanting to participate in this project that I was doing. And there was still all the distancing and mask wearing and all of that. And so, people would just drop dead birds off for me on the table under the pergola. I photographed a lot of garbage, essentially. A lot of the things that just became more important because of isolation, just because everything was different in that unprecedented and strange time. That the things that I had became strangely more precious. And so, well, grocery shopping was kind of a special experience, a special and dangerous experience. And so I photographed a lot of paper bags and a lot of plastic bags, which I don't like plastic in general, but man, you can make it look like silk if you work with it a little bit. And so, yeah, I became really captivated by paper and plastic and whatever was available, things that I grew. Because this body of work ended up being so extensive, what I put up here for you all to look at is it's very random because there's so much of it. This piece was actually commissioned by the artist who made the ceramics. She brought me all kinds of things that she wanted photographed, and they were pictures for her, but this one I stole back. That's mine. there's a mouse in there. And that again, sort of the fantastical but not photoshopped. Is the mouse alive? Everybody wants to know. Is the snake alive? So yeah, that fits with my theme of fantastical in real time without being Photoshop or superimposed or anything. It's like playing with real life. This picture was inspired by a painting by Artemisia Gentileschi that is a woman cutting off a man's head. And this is the detail of the blood. I mean, my rendition of the detail of the blood, which is a funny thing to do, recreate a detail of a painting that is kind of an insignificant detail in a very intense painting. I worked on this picture quite a bit and was not getting it right and not getting it right and not getting it right. And I very much wanted it to look like the light in certain paintings, and it was not working. And then I lit the picture with a single candle and got it, which is funny because obviously that's how a lot of the still lives in those paintings were lit. It just took me a while to get around to, oh, I know how I could make it look like that. I'll just actually do it the way they do it. Oh, wow, I still have a lot to show you. When things started opening up again, when people could be around each other, but still distanced, and I desperately wanted to get people back in the studio, but I needed the pictures to reflect what was actually going on, which is that I felt like we got to be around people again, but not closely, and almost like we couldn't see people as clearly as one would want. And so I started photographing people in mirrors so that you could see the distance, so that they would express that, okay, we get to be around each other now, but not too close, like there was a barrier. And so the mirror is the barrier. And I had a really good time doing these. I did a bunch of them, and I guess I like a challenge. And so I already had sort of overcome the challenge of doing color at all. But then the challenge of doing these reflected pictures and multiple reflections and not reflecting myself or the tripod, or darn it, that corner of the camera, or wonderful challenge and very satisfying to get it right. And so I worked with that for quite a while. A lot of the pictures, actually most of them, are people photographed from behind, because it just emphasizes that not quite being able to connect with people yet. It's all a big metaphor. And trying to integrate the still life with the figures, and the figures are reflected in the mirror, and trying to keep the depth of field so that the foreground is sharp and the mirrors sort of represent another world, but trying to get that sharp. It was super challenging and really fun. Okay, make that little thing go away so you can see that there's a dead bird. Ah, there. This one is especially challenging because there's two figures reflected in two different mirrors. And so those figures have to be in two very different places in the studio. And then I had to take the picture without being in the picture. This picture is called The Painter's Daughter, and it really has to do with differences in light and hue, and an old school kind of light where it's warm light, and a more modern, like photographic kind of light, which is cool light. So the figure reflected in the mirror on the right, who is the painter's daughter, that's like modern photographic light, and it's cool light. And then the figure reflected in the mirror on the left, that's the painter depicted, with a warm, more painterly. Anyway, these were super fun to do. And I actually am going to continue doing them, but I'm not sure if I'm considering them part of the body of work that is the COVID Vanitas, which are all still lives, because they go a little in too far of a other direction, though there is a still life in all of them. And a dead bird, representing the loss of hope in most of them. This is the most successful one. And it's just because I successfully made it that there's all different worlds going on. There are 3 different levels of spaces in that picture. And everything's in focus. All the colors are matchy-matchy. So there's a still life taken the same day that I took that. Like, I got frustrated with taking this picture, and then I was like, okay, never mind. I'll just go back to what's easier. Fish and birds are common themes throughout my work forever. In terms of the symbolism that is like a thread through all of this work, lemons symbolize the bitterness of life. And this picture is about, it's so literal, is about measuring the bitterness of life, because I put the tape measure that also looks like the lemons. And you know what? I was having a bad day. So back to referencing the pictures that had outside of my little burg influences. This is the picture that I did that was like the Black Lives Matter protests, and just everything being so heightened and tense, and just how horrendous America can be. And so if you know, it's very dark. I don't know how clearly you can see it, but it's the Statue of Liberty, and she's blindfolded and on fire. And then there's the glass half empty or half full, depending on which side of the protest barrier you were on. This is a picture that I did at the beginning of the war with the Ukraine. That's sad. That's, you know, obviously the yarn symbolizes blood and baby shoe, and you know, that's about some outside stuff that was going on and crept into my studio. And then there you go, the Ukrainian flag. And this is the picture I'm going to end on, because that's all we've got, folks. But that was 80 some odd pictures. And there is an ending picture to the COVID Vanitas. I didn't include it here because I'm not exactly happy with it yet. The ending picture is the picture that I took when I got COVID. So the whole arc of all of that work was all happening when I kept myself safe, and I kept my family safe, and I didn't travel, and I didn't hug my mom, and all of that stuff. And then when things started to open up, I was stir crazy. I needed to go somewhere. So I did. I went to Mexico. I went to Mexico City, which was fantastic. And my eldest daughter was living in Guadalajara. She sat out the pandemic in Guadalajara. I went to Guadalajara to visit her. I went back to Mexico City, and I had gotten COVID. And that was during that time when you couldn't get back into the United States if you had a positive test. So, you know, I finally ventured out of the studio, broke loose, went to Mexico, got COVID, couldn't come home. And while I had COVID in Mexico, I did a still life that is the final picture in the series. But seeing as I had COVID, it's a little off. It has to be included, but I can't include it yet because I need to do something to it. My only real symptom of COVID was that I was amazingly stupid. People say brain fog. It was more than brain fog. I was just really dumb and essentially couldn't figure out how to get home. And so luckily I have a village of people who worked on that and got me home. But yeah, I just thought, okay, now I live in Mexico. Somebody Venmo'd me some taco money. I was going to be fine. But that's it. How long have I talked? Can I stop?
I guess you can stop.
Did I do good?
You did well.
Okay.
Very well. Enjoyed it.
Good.
How about the rest of you?
Yeah, thank you, Zoe. I think your work is stunning and so inspirational.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions?
I had a question. At the beginning or near the beginning, you showed a couple animals frozen in ice.
Yeah.
Now I've done not animals, but I've done similar work, but I always left it in the container.
Oh, so you were photographing the container with the ice in it?
Right, and the flowers or whatever I put in there. So do you just warm up the container and drop it out, or how did you do that?
The fish
Mm-hmm.
were frozen in milk cartons.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And so I just cut them off.
I gotcha.
And then usually let things melt a little bit so that, you know, they're not so.
Right.
And the round one, I don't actually remember what I used to, you know, maybe a plastic tray or something, you know, just something that sort of acts like an ice cube tray where you can
Mm-hmm.
wiggle things out of there.
Yeah.
I have another question too, about your still lifes and your lighting. Did you use natural light for your
Yes.
with your
Yes.
models?
And thank you for asking that question because it's really pertinent and I forget to say it. I have a natural light studio.
Mhm.
And I am surprisingly bad at studio lighting with artificial light. So I've always had a natural light studio. I have a skylight that has a remote so I can close it. So I, you know, and then a series of, you know, baffles and blinds and such, so that I can control the light. But mostly, I have a tendency to build my studio around the light.
Mhm. Oh, the light is great, and I like natural light too, and I don't do very well with artificial light, so that's good to know.
Same. Yeah, I mean, there's amazing things you can do if you have a window.
Yeah.
Just saying, you know, it doesn't really take.
No, and the shadows.
Yeah, the funny thing is that when I'm doing my commercial work and somebody wants to schedule a shoot and they want to schedule it at night, I'm always like, oh, no. I don't do that. I don't do dark.
I get it.
Anybody
Okay.
else have anything? Well, I love your studio walls. They're gorgeous.
Thank you. I did that myself.
Well, you did quite a job on those. You can come over anytime.
I noticed one thing. A lot of your photos have knives in them, but they're always turned cutting edge up. Is there some reason that you do it that way other than balancing it, or?
You know, I could come up with some wonderful symbolism of what it
Yeah.
means to have the knife facing up, but the truth of the matter is, it's just easier to balance them that
Right.
way.
Yeah.
And they look good. You know, if you get that little light on the blade, very nice.
You know, you could put a piece of bubble gum or something on it and hide that bubble gum and then turn it over.
I know. I have museum wax. Do you know museum wax?
Yeah, that works.
Love that stuff.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Yeah.
Bill has a question. Do you use titles or text to communicate the themes of the work?
In general, yes. Though the COVID Vanitas series, the titles are quarantine number 1 through 60 something, and then it switches to pandemic number 1 through 200 and something. However, that being said, each of these pictures has, as part of the title, the day in the sequence of my personal pandemic that it was taken. So it'll be pandemic number blah, 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 and then it will say day 142 or something. And that sometimes that day number 142, even without having the actual date that the picture was taken, you can tell what was going on in the larger world when that picture was taken. But previous to this series, yes, my pictures tend to have a title that is explanatory.
Okay.
Well, your photos are wonderful. I really appreciated seeing them and you sharing them with us.
Thank you. I appreciate that you asked me to speak.
Well, thank you very much. Now I started watching the series grow through the pandemic. And then when you started with the mirrors, that just sent me over the edge. That was a whole nother world.
It is a whole other world.
Yeah, I fell in love with those.
Oh, good. Thanks.
But if nobody else has anything, we'll go ahead and wrap it up for tonight.
Thank you
Next
so much.
month,
Great.
April 20th, we have Sarah Hadley joining us.
Oh, that'll be great. Sarah's great. It'd be fun to see what she does.
Yeah. So thanks again, Zoe.
Thank
And
you.
thanks everybody for joining us.
And
Okay.
any of you, if you come to northern New Mexico, come visit.
Where
Okay.
are you? Where are you in northern New Mexico?
In Taos.
Oh, okay. We were just there. It's
You
beautiful.
were? Oh, darn it.
We'll be back.
Okay. Okay, guys, thanks.
Okay.